What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. And this is our bite-sized series all around how small changes make a big difference in quality. So you may have listened to episode 1 where we talked about top tips for making quality visible. So we hope you enjoyed it. Well, this is episode 2. And in this episode, we're going to be talking or giving you top tips for adding quality without slowing your teams down. So this is going to be an interesting one. So why does this matter? So I'm sure you've all experienced this where in your teams, quality, and I know you've experienced this, Chris, right? Where quality is seen as friction. It's often seen as that friction between getting stuff out the door and stuff like that. And sometimes it's even deemed as a blocker. Oh, it's quality, it's QA, it's testing that slows us down. So we're going to talk and give you some tips around how you can add quality by and avoid that impact or that perceived, let's say, impact of slowing teams down. So this is going to be an exciting one, Chris. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really good. I think there's some really good topics on this, quite thought-provoking as well. And, we've got our thoughts on it, but I think, once this gets out and we start getting some comments back from people, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on it because, this is just as much as a learning opportunity for us as it is for anybody else. So,
Yeah,
yeah, if you've
absolutely.
got experience with anything, absolutely, comment away and we appreciate all of your feedback. So, yeah,
Perfect. So shall we get into it then? Yeah.
yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. So let's look at the first tip that's on our list. So the first one is all around focusing on flow, not gates. Okay. So what does that mean to you, Chris? Why is that one important?
Because, yeah, historically, if anybody who's worked in software for a period of time, you will have heard, about quality gates and the whole, especially with engineering teams, developers, and quality people, there will be that handover and that, or as some people call it, throwing it over the fence, throwing it
Mm.
over the wall, the quality. Um, that's the way I see gates initially, but also like at the end of cycles, it's like you absolutely cannot go forward unless you've done this, and this. Such a rigid approach that slows things down, it blocks things, and it doesn't allow conversations to happen. And they have that kind of negative connotation with them as just basically blockers and not a lot of good. Whereas I think when you talk about flow, naturally it's a much better word, isn't it? You think of the flow of the river, it's seamless, it can run at pace, but it can be quite tranquil at the same time. It can have a steady flow to it. And I think that's what we want to aspire to within high performing teams and within organizations, looking to find that balance between quality and delivering at pace, but finding the right level of quality. So to me, it's like if you have QA columns and you're in a team and you've got a QA column and you're finding a lot of bottlenecks happening within that QA column, have conversations with your team about what does this actually help us with and
Mm.
is there a better way of doing it, and thinking about a bit more of a flow state and actually, believe it or not, removing a QA column and having the process of engineering tickets can just sit under whatever else you want to define a column as, and thinking of it as that flow state is when everybody is collectively involved because you all have a shared goal of actually, achieving a great high quality product at the end of it, but you don't have to categorize it in that way,
Mm.
which just kind of shifts onus onto one person to the next instead of the team as a whole. Yeah, so don't think about having quality gates because it's only actually hurting your organization in terms of being able to deliver quality products at pace. So again, think about the flow state and remove some of those constraints that you would have on how you would release and create more of a template of discussion rather than absolute um like tick boxes that everything has to be checked off before we can move forward, because then that allows your teams to have more organic conversations, understand the context, and sometimes you might have a fairly high level of confidence within your product, but you might understand that there is a few issues still. But when you look at it from a risk-based perspective, the risk of putting that out there isn't that great, but actually the reward of getting it in front of your customers earlier allows you to get the information that you need to understand your customer better, but also how your product performs in the market and things. But you'd negate that opportunity to be able to do that if you are just so rigid in having these quality gates and just being focused on ticking all of these boxes.
Yeah, I just to kind of reiterate, package up some of what you said there. I'm a big advocate of removing the QA column, right, or your test column, or whatever it is, right. Quality is not a phase, it's not a gate, it's a continuous thing that we're trying to, a continuous entity, right, that sits within our system. So the flow is the system that we're working within. So how does work flow through? How do we create feedback loops of a continuous nature? Those kind of things. Having a column on a board, to your point, just squeezes those conversations to a moment in time, which isn't what we want. So thinking about how you can do that, create some different types of feedback loops throughout. That might be at your stand up, it might be certain calls or sessions that you have, it might be a triage, whatever it is, right? Just look for opportunities to feedback on quality. And then that removes the need for these gates, because you're constantly talking and you're constantly doing that. And that actually brings us straight on to our next tip, Chris. And what's that one?
Yes, it does. Yeah, very nicely as well. So the another tip that we pulled out was to shift those conversations earlier, but not to shift the work.
Mm.
So, what's your thoughts around that, Stu?
Yeah, so I mean, we talk about shift left, right, and all this jazz, and I've just come to the point where I just don't like the term anymore, if I'm honest, because I think it's been overused, it's become a buzzword, and it's lost its meaning. But actually, it was always about, in all honesty, it was always about shifting testing left, right? How do we test earlier? When actually, that's moving an activity left, which is the work that you're doing, right? Whereas actually what we want to do is we want to shift the conversations we're having to the left and as early as possible, so that we can prevent things from potentially happening further down the line. Now, we've all been there, right? We've all been in these situations where we're going through, we're testing a new feature and we're starting to find issues, right? But a number of those issues potentially could prevented if we'd have just worked more collaboratively, had conversations earlier, got an alignment about actually what it is we're looking to deliver, what it is we need to build, and therefore what it is we need to test. And often it's the disconnect between those three is where issues start building up. So the sooner we can shift those conversations, and work more closely with our product teams, work more closely with the developers as as a collective, then for me that's when you start seeing the benefits of being able to deliver the right thing in the right way, right? So rather than thinking about how do we shift the testing left, no, think about how you shift your conversations left, how you shift your collaboration, and then just focus on how you then do these things continuously. So we talked about in the last one, having regular feedback loops. That's part of conversation, right? And they can happen all the time, but what is the earliest opportunity that you can actually collectively have a proper conversation about what it is you want to deliver, why you want to deliver it, who the customer is, and then you can start talking about how we're going to build this thing, okay, and you can then associate, and so on and so on, right? It just, for me, it's so important to start having those conversations as early as possible.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't think I would add um, any more on that. I think you summarized it really well, hit some important points. And I think that does also tie in nicely. There's a nice kind of chain reaction through some of the talking points we're going to discuss, but it takes us on nicely to the next one as well.
It does. Yeah, it does. And the next one, and it's almost like we thought about these, right? I don't know, but the next one, the next tip for how we can add quality without slowing our teams down is all around reducing the rework instead of adding more checks. So how often do we do that? How often do we add more checks, Chris, rather than focusing on the rework?
Yeah, it happens all the time, right? I mean, what we historically will see is If teams say don't communicate that well and they're not having those conversations earlier, they will exhaustively test. They'll put in so many different checks in order to assure the quality of the product that the piece of software that we're testing. Which just increases the workload within the QA teams, creates a bottleneck. It slows down delivery, it reduces confidence, and ultimately can lead to the business having to make a decision if timelines are very critical to cut the testing effort and the timelines down in order to meet delivery. So there is definitely a smarter way in which we can get out of that pattern and that overwhelming feeling of just testing kind of coming left, right, and centre and being an overwhelming situation with really not adding too much value in terms of being confident in what we're delivering. So it's a bit like what Stu mentioned, having those conversations earlier. So I think one of the real important points, again, what I talk about is quality coaching, is understanding what everybody's role is in delivering the product. And instead of putting in more and more checks, get yourself involved in conversations earlier in the product life cycle. Understand your product owner and their role and what what their business's aspirations are, understand from a delivery perspective the timelines and potential pitfalls that we have and things that we have to manage in terms of how we're going to deliver. From an engineering perspective, speak with your engineers and developers, understand where their challenges are, understand when you're talking about a product feature, is it a complex piece of architecture that's going to require a little bit more thought around how we test? Could we have earlier conversations around that and discover it as a team? And by doing all of these pieces and building up key information about each person's roles and the value that they bring, as well as having those conversations earlier about your product, then actually reduces the testing effort needed, because you build confidence earlier, because you have greater understanding. You remove ambiguity from the acceptance criteria. You create alignment within your teams. You're all on the same page. You create a better understanding of the risks associated with the product under test and what's being added to it. And then you can understand the timelines and really make educated decisions earlier on about what some of the trade-offs may need to be. And you can make them with a risk-based stance rather than being subject to test and quality effort being cut at the end, regardless of where the risk is, which only heightens risk because you're not making the decision with the right information at hand. So I think it's really important to drive those conversations earlier, because by doing, although you may feel like you're slowing things down initially, over time you will reap the rewards of a much more efficient process and build confidence a lot quicker, which then also frees you up to look at other aspects of quality and not just test and effort, and think of other ways that you can improve processes, etc. Create benchmark and metrics, or improve your pipelines and things like that, rather than just being bogged down in the manual test and effort. And gradually you become more and more efficient over time. But yeah, you can probably tell I'm a bit passionate about that one because I can breathe now.
Yeah, but I just want to, you start building to a point I wanted to add is, if you're just adding more checks, think of it like this, right? If you've got, all you're doing is you're trying to treat the symptoms of a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to add a check here. I'm going to add a check there. I'm going to add another set of tests here. Oh, we're going to now do this. Now we've got a quality gate here. Right. All you're doing is you're reacting to the symptoms. Right. So if you think about your own body, your legs might be hurting, but it may be something to do. It might be your back that's the problem. Right. Or, it's never, the thing that hurts is never the root cause of the problem, very rarely. Right. So thinking about coming at quality, thinking about the overall system. And this is what you were just saying there about the different parts to where you could start thinking about adding quality in pipelines and so on. That's really important. And rather than going, I'm going to react to this event and I'm going to put this check in, right? go, actually, what was the root cause of that across the entire system, right? Let's track our way through. And okay, people go, well, we do root cause analysis on incidents, right? Yeah, but you're reacting to an event at that point, right? You need to be thinking about the system holistically that you're working within at any possible moment, right? And by doing that, shifting conversations earlier, like you were saying, and like the last tip, and thinking about where and how you build quality in, or where it's not being built in, will gradually reduce that rework, because you're starting to understand the system, and you're starting to build prevention measures in, rather than think like more opportunities to just check something. So that for me, that's why that for me is a really important one. And obviously all wraps into the other things that we're talking about, and people will see as we go through all these episodes, everything links like to a bigger picture. But systems thinking is something that people, I think, need to really focus more on when it comes to holistic quality, and thinking about, you know, how that's delivered continuously.
Definitely. And like, we've all been there, and I think it's still one of the biggest struggles we face within, our roles in the industry is when you're faced with an ever-growing test pack, and it's because we've been reactive and we just keep adding more and more scenarios, more and more things to test. And it's same with automation. How many times have we dove into an automation framework and it becomes really brittle, flaky, and takes a long time to run because we just kept adding more and more tests in, striving to try and have more confidence in our system, but actually it just hurts us because it slows us down. And over time, as people move on, it becomes much harder to, translate the value of those tests added, because they were just a moment in time and not really decided like the true value of why they were being put in the first place. Because if you make if you've got the right level of information and context, you make educated decisions about what you're going to test when, and that'll stand the history of time. But when you are creating tests that are just to basically band-aid something, it does, it just hurts where in the long game it becomes harder to understand. So it's what we've discussed there is kind of a way to get away from, that pain point we've all
Yeah.
faced. And
Yeah.
So we've got a final point as well. I think this is a really interesting one as well, and I've already been talking to Stu about this one, and I've actually learned a few things from his experience. So it's things for me to go and have a look at as well, which is why I love these conversations. But this one is say yes and instead of saying no. And that might sound a little bit tricky when you hear it, but I'm sure Stu will break it down a little bit more as he goes into it. But yeah, from your perspective, what do you mean around when you say yes and instead of just simply saying no?
So this is very much a coaching technique. So how often do you say, somebody says something to you and maybe you don't really agree, and actually you want to get your point across? You might say, yeah, but, or yeah, however, or no, I'm not sure. And then you proceed by saying what you want to proceed with. Immediately what you're doing is you're putting that other person into a position where they're on the back foot. So they may have come to you with an idea, or they may come to you with, a suggestion or whatever. And you're also stifling conversation, right? Coming back to what we're saying, you're immediately stifling the opportunity, because that person's now like, oh, okay, because basically, but is that, right? You've literally like put up a roadblock straight away. And the other thing is, like, some people go, yeah, I agree with you, but if you've got a but, you don't agree with that person. And that's okay. That's not a problem. But don't say you agree with them, but. Okay? But what you can say is, yeah, okay. And also, because that way you're building on that. So you say, yes, and how about blah, blah, blah. So you're acknowledging what they're saying. You're actually taking it in, right? And that is really key when you're, if you truly want to be a coach, whether you want to put the word quality in front of it or anything like that, but let's talk about quality coaching for the sake of obviously the topics that we're talking about in this podcast, right? You need to be able to drive open conversation and keep that conversation flowing, right? You can't be in a position where you just shut it down. And this is a really good technique to where you're doing that. So say, for example, a developer comes to you and they give their opinion on something that maybe, you might not fully agree with, or you might, have a differing opinion. That's fine. But try and allow that conversation to happen, allow it to flow, allow for that person to be heard. And by listening actively to start with, and that's key. And then following that by saying, yeah, okay, yeah. And also, we could potentially yada, 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 right? It's the building on top of, right? So it's acknowledging what they've said and not just blocking that conversation from happening. And it's really important, especially when we're trying to, how often have we been, years gone by, this release can't go out. Can this release go out? No. Right? Straight away, no. Yeah. Can this release go out? Yes. And also, though, we'd have to think about, yes, it can go out. And we just need to be mindful of, so on and so on. So it starts allowing conversation to happen. It allows better communication all round, my experience. And obviously, it's not an easy thing. And sometimes you do find yourself going, yeah, but, right? It's just human nature. You do it, right? But in those situations, the more you can create like a building block to allow the conversation to keep going rather than shutting it down is really important.
I think the use of language there is so powerful. It's we were discussing it before we come on here, and like having that and I've just wrote some points down there as you were talking. I think it's when you, instead of saying but or words like that, which basically shut the conversation down there and bring forth your opinion over somebody else's. I think having that basically is a building block, and it shows a level of respect. It shows that you've listened to the person, and I wrote down like the quote. I'm sure a lot of people's heard it. Like it shows them that you're listening to understand. You're not listening to respond.
Exactly.
Which, having a butt in there sometimes feels you're just waiting for the opportunity to overrule with your opinion.
Yeah.
Whereas at least in this situation, you're hearing them, you're then building on it, which adds more context and understanding. But if there's more than just you and an individual in the room, other people can hear the conversation, and the power of that language invites other people to then come forward, and they might follow in with another and you start chaining all of these, and organically you just create a really healthy environment where people are having open conversations without the fear of being shot down, which ties directly to creating environments of psychological safety for teams. So just the change of one word can have such a positive impact on how teams operate and communicate with each other. And the ongoing effects of just using that type of terminology. So yeah, I think it's really powerful. Obviously, it's something I will take forward as well. I was thinking of a situation there. We don't always do things perfectly, and you may be involved in a situation and think, Stu might say something, and I go, yeah, but it's not over there, right? I'm like, oh, I have to wait till the next time you say something so I can say an and. Well, no, you can start and train that type of mentality in, and you can, if you acknowledge, right, I've used a but there, that was maybe wrong, then you can maybe say, well, have we thought about this, or could we think about this? What's your thoughts on this? And again, it's another way of inviting that conversation. So eventually you might get to the point where just, without thinking, you've trained yourself to be able to use the right language at the right time. But, at least if you fail the first time, the road's not blocked, you can just take a different direction with it and eventually get to that point of being more efficient with your communication.
Yeah, absolutely right. And these you can't just snap your fingers and the world changes, right? So you've just got to. It's training your brain, and that's always really hard and such like. But it does make a big difference, and it does remove that perception that this person's always going to shut me down. They're a blocker, etc., etc., etc. And by doing that, it just removes that friction, like we said, right? And that's really key. And that brings us to the end of another episode, Chris.
Yes, I
Another one
know.
done and dusted.
So yeah, hopefully those insights and kind of conversation starters and those things that we've covered create a little bit of food for thought, and as always, comment and give your perspectives. If there's anything that you would add or change, by all means let us know. But we appreciate everybody's input and taking the time to listen into another episode of the Quality Talks podcast. But until next time.
Well, I'm going to hold you there, Chris. Let's
Oh.
not forget the audience question. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So those that listen to the first episode, for every one of these episodes that we do, we're going to leave you with a little question, and that question here is, where have you accidentally become a bottleneck to your team from a quality perspective? Have a think about it. Is there anything that you're doing right now? Is there anything you've ever done that you've inadvertently created some sort of bottleneck? Maybe you didn't even realize you're doing it. So have a think about it.
and we will too as well.
And we will too as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but obviously, like we said, like, share whenever you can. Obviously, it helps us and the platform massively. And if you've got any thoughts for, up and coming tips that you'd like to hear, obviously let us know. But yeah, until next time, thanks again, and we'll see you for another episode of the Quality Talks podcast. But till then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.